The room was buzzing, the kind of loud, happy noise that comes from 100 people all talking at once, glasses clinking, laughter bouncing off the high ceilings. I was standing near the buffet table, feeling a genuine warmth spread through me. I'd just finished giving a little toast for my boss. Retirement, nothing major, just a few heartfelt words about his mentorship. People had clapped, a few had even sought me out afterward to say how nice it was. My husband David was right beside me, his hand a firm, steady pressure on the small of my back. To anyone looking, we were the picture of it, the supportive couple, him the proud husband, me the gracious wife, finally getting a bit of recognition at the annual company gala. His hand felt heavy, though not protective, not anymore. It felt like an anchor. I could feel the tension in his fingers through the fabric of my dress. When I stepped down from the little makeshift podium, his smile was tight, not quite reaching his eyes. Head leaned in and said, "Quite the performance," his voice light but with an edge that only I could hear. That was our dynamic. The public facade was everything, the perfect life, the perfect marriage. It was a full-time job, maintaining that illusion, and I was the lead actor. I remember thinking just for a second how the crystal chandeliers made everything sparkle so deceptively, how they glossed over the cracks. He guided me away from the small group that had gathered, his grip a little too tight. We moved towards a quieter corner near a large potted fern. The music shifted to a slower song, and the crowd's chatter seemed to swell again, a wave of sound. I thought we were just moving to get a drink. I was wrong. He turned me to face him, his body blocking the view of most of the room. He was still smiling, that public smile, but his eyes were flat, cold. He leaned in close so his lips were almost touching my ear. It would have looked like an intimate gesture to anyone watching, a loving whisper. But the sound that came out wasn't loving. It was a low, venomous hiss meant only for me. "You really love this, don't you?" The attention strutting around like you actually did something. His breath was hot against my skin. I felt my own smile freeze in place, a brittle mask. My heart started to hammer against my ribs. This was the routine, the private dismantling after any public moment. That was mine alone. I braced for the rest, for the familiar words that would shrink me back down to size. And then he said it, the words that were always the foundation, the final blow: "You're nothing without me." The moment the words left his mouth, the universe conspired against him. The song ended abruptly. The lead singer of the band said something into the microphone that I didn't catch, and a wave of laughter rippled through part of the crowd. But in our immediate vicinity, a small circle of people, including my colleague Sarah and her partner, had been in mid-conversation. They'd just reached a natural pause, and into that sudden local pocket of silence his whisper didn't just land, it echoed. It wasn't a shout, it was worse. It was clear, sharp, and utterly unmistakable. "You're nothing without me." I felt the blood drain from my face. A coldness started in my chest and spread outwards, icing over my veins. The noisy, vibrant room seemed to tilt, the colors and sounds blurring into a nauseating swirl. My fixed smile felt like a grotesque rictus. I was aware of every tiny detail: the scratchy texture of his suit jacket against my cheek, the faint smell of his cologne, now sickeningly familiar, the way Sarah's eyes, which had been casually glancing in our direction, widened in sheer disbelief. The silence didn't break, it solidified. It started with Sarah and her partner. Their faces went from casual amusement to frozen shock. Then the man standing next to them, a senior accountant from the third floor, he heard it to his head snapped towards us. The Silence spread out from our little corner like a stain, a bubble of awful dawning comprehension. Conversations faltered, heads turned, the laughter from across the room sounded miles away. A distant mocking soundtrack. I saw the exact moment David realized what had happened. I felt the muscles in his arm still around me go rigid. I watched the color leave his face, a slow, ghastly fade from confident pink to a sickly gray. The controlled aggression in his eyes vanished, replaced by pure, unadulterated panic. The mask wasn't just slipping, it had shattered on the floor between us, and everyone could see the sharp, ugly pieces. He tried to backtrack, his voice a strained, too loud attempt at normalcy. "I was just joking, honey," he stammered, but the words were hollow, pathetic. They hung in the air, amplifying the horror, not diminishing it. And then I saw the reactions. They weren't just stares of pity. I saw anger. I saw it in the set of Sarah's jaw and the way her partner took a half step forward. I saw dawning horror on the face of a young intern who had always thought David was so charming. I saw the way people exchanged glances, a silent, furious confirmation of suspicions they'd probably harbored for years. The humiliation was a physical force, a burning brand on my skin. I wanted the floor to open up and swallow me whole, to erase me from this moment, from their gazes. But then something else rose up. Through the shame, a strange, cold clarity. For years those words had been my secret reality, a truth he wielded in private to keep me small, to keep me his. They were the weapon he used to ensure I never forgot my place. But now they weren't a secret anymore. They were out in the open, exposed under the bright, unforgiving lights of the ballroom. And a public truth is a different creature altogether. It can't be controlled, it can't be hidden. The power he had over those words, over my perception of myself, evaporated in that single awful public moment. The burning humiliation began to mix with something else, a fierce, unexpected sense of validation. It was no longer my word against his, it was his word, witnessed by 100 people. The carefully constructed narrative of our perfect life was gone, and what was left was the raw, ugly truth that I had lived with for so long, and everyone could see it. They weren't just looking at me with pity, they were looking at him with disgust. I didn't look away from the crowd. I let them see my face, pale and shocked as it was. I didn't try to force a smile, to make a joke, to cover for him like I had 1,000 times before. I just stood there, finally completely still. The trembling in my hands began to subside, the tightness in my throat loosened. I was standing in the wreckage of my life, but for the first time I wasn't standing there alone. Then Sarah moved. She broke from the frozen tableau of her group and walked the few steps over to us. She didn't look at David. She looked directly at me. Her eyes were full of a fierce, protective fire. She gently placed her hand on my arm, a simple, solid gesture. "Come on," she said, her voice quiet but firm, cutting through the thick silence that still enveloped us. "Let's get you a drink." That touch, those words broke the last chain. The spell was gone, the illusion was over. David stood there exposed, his face a mess of panic and impotent rage. She was nothing in that moment, a pathetic man whose true self had been revealed. As Sarah guided me away, I took one last look back at him. He was already trying to talk to someone, to spin a story. But the person was turning away, their expression a mask of contempt. The crowd's attention was shifting from me to him. The spectacle was no longer my humiliation, it was his walking away. The noise of the party started to filter back in. But it sounded different now. It wasn't a threatening hum. It was just background noise. The words "you're nothing" echoed in my mind, but they had lost their power. They were just empty sounds now because everyone in that room had just witnessed the exact opposite. They had seen me stand there and take the worst thing he could throw at me. They had seen me not break. And in their eyes, in Sarah's hand on my arm, I saw a reflection of myself I hadn't seen in years. I saw someone who was something. The noise of the restaurant was a solid wall of sound, clinking glasses, the murmur of 100 conversations, the low hum of the ventilation system. It was supposed to be a celebration. A colleague's promotion. I remember the cool condensation on my wine glass, the way the linen tablecloth felt stiff under my fingertips. I was focused on a story someone was telling, trying to appear engaged, trying to be normal. And then I felt him lean in. It wasn't a gentle lean, it was an intrusion into my space. His breath was warm against my ear, a grotesque parody of intimacy in the middle of all those people, and he whispered it, 3 words, so quiet, so precise, they sliced through all that noise like a scalpel. You are nothing. Then he leaned back, picked up his own glass, and took a sip of wine. As if he'd just commented on the weather, he smiled at me. That was the worst part, the calm, self-satisfied smile. For a second, the entire restaurant went silent for me. I could see people's mouths moving, but I heard nothing. The words echoed in the vacuum had created around me. Nothing. My face felt hot. I wanted to sink into the floor. The old me would have absorbed those words, accepted them as truth, and carried that shame home in silence. But that night something else clicked into place. It was a cold, clear, mechanical click. This wasn't just an insult. This was a piece of data, an admission. And it had been delivered in front of witnesses. I excused myself to the ladies' room. I locked the stall door and leaned my forehead against the cool metal. I didn't cry. I breathed in and out. And I made a plan. The humiliation was still there, a burning ember in my chest, but I smothered it with purpose. I took out my phone. I opened the notes app. I typed the date, the time, the exact location. I quoted him verbatim. You are nothing. I listed the people at our table: Sarah Jenkins, Michael Reed, Ben, and Chloe Carter. I noted what he was wearing, a blue shirt, the one ID bought him for his birthday. I documented my own reaction. Felt hot, dizzy, excused self to restroom. At approximately 8:45 p.m. I was creating a record. This was no longer my shame, it was my evidence. The next morning, I called a lawyer, not the friendly family attorney who had handled our house closing, but a specialist recommended by a domestic violence hotline. Her name was Brenda, and her voice was like steady ground. I told her what happened. I read her the note from my phone. She was quiet for a moment, and then she said, "That's powerful. A public witnessed act of denigration like that is a textbook example of coercive control. It's not just about the words. It's about the act. It demonstrates a pattern of behavior intended to isolate and demean. The fact that he did it in public shows a chilling level of confidence, a belief that there would be no consequences. We can use this. That phone call changed everything." Brenda explained that in the eyes of the court, an incident like this wasn't just a Hesed, she said, marital spat. It was an event with multiple independent witnesses. It was evidence of a character trait. My mindset shifted completely. Every snide remark he made after that, every attempt to control the finances, every time he tried to twist a conversation, I documented it. I saw it all through a new lens. How does this fit the pattern? The whisper was the cornerstone, the undeniable fact upon which I could build the true story of our marriage. The real work began. I had to be careful, strategic at a quiet lunch with Sarah, my colleague. I brought it up casually. That was a strange night at the restaurant, wasn't it? I said. She looked uncomfortable. Immediately when David whispered to me, I prompted gently. Her face flooded with relief. Oh, and I was so upset for you. What did he say? We all saw your face just fall. I didn't tell her the exact words. Not then. I just said it was pretty awful. Would you be willing, if it ever came to it, to just say what you saw, how it looked? She didn't hesitate. Absolutely anything you need. I did the same with Michael a few days later. He was more blunt. Yeah, it was creepy. He said, one minute you're laughing, the next you look like you've seen a ghost. He had that smug look on his face. I didn't like it. I collected these conversations, these offers of support. Brenda had them draft formal signed affidavits. The Carters, who were his friends too, were more difficult. They initially tried to downplay it. Oh, you know David. He has a dry sense of humor, Chloe said, but Brenda advised me to have them state simply what they observed. That he whispered something, and that I became visibly upset. Their reluctance to condemn him actually helped. In a way, it showed the court that even his own friends couldn't convincingly paint it as a joke. He played his part perfectly. When I finally told him I was filing for divorce and cited the restaurant incident, he did exactly what Brenda predicted. He was dismissive. You're divorcing me over a joke. You're so sensitive. You always take things the wrong way. It was taken completely out of context. He said this to me, to his lawyer, to anyone who would listen. But it was a joke, is a flimsy defense when the alleged punchline is your wife's fundamental worth, delivered without laughter to a silent, horrified recipient. His attempts to minimize it only reinforced the pattern of manipulation. He was demonstrating in real time that he would never take responsibility for the harm he caused. I gathered everything, a photo of the restaurant interior from their website showing the intimate close-at tables where a whisper could be seen, but not overheard, the guest list from the event. I found a financial record from years ago where had hidden a bank account, and I linked it to a time when had told me we couldn't afford to fix my car, that I just needed to be more careful with money. I created a timeline with the whisper at the center, connecting it to a dozen other smaller private moments of belittlement. The case was no longer about one night, it was about a lifetime of being systematically erased. The day we went to court for the custody hearing, the air was so thick you could barely breathe. The room was all polished wood and stern faces. David sat at his table, looking confident, even smiling faintly at his lawyer. He thought this was a frivolous claim. He thought he could talk his way out of it. Then my lawyer called Sarah to the stand. She was nervous, her voice shaky at first. Brenda led her through it gently. Can you describe the event you attended with Mrs. Delaney and her husband, Sarah? Did she describe the table, the mood, and did you observe an interaction between Mr. and Mrs. Delaney? Yes, Sarah said, her voice growing stronger. He leaned over and whispered something in her ear. And what was Mrs. Delaney's reaction? She froze. The color drained from her face. She looked utterly humiliated. Then she got up and left the table. And what was Mr. Delaney's reaction? He just sat there, Sarah said, looking directly at David. He sat there and smiled. Then it was his lawyer's turn for cross-examination. He tried to rattle her. Isn't it true you have no idea what was actually said? He boomed. Sarah didn't flinch. That's correct. I don't know what he said, but I have eyes. I know what I saw, and what I saw Was cruel. The lawyer moved on, flustered. Then it was Michael's turn. His testimony was even more direct. It was a power move, he stated, flatly pure and simple. You don't smile after you've told your wife a joke. Shed in joy. You look devastated. And I'm sorry, Mrs. Delaney, you look destroyed. Then came the moment my lawyer stood up and addressed the judge. Your Honor, we would like to enter into the record the specific language used by Mr. Delaney that evening as attested to by Mrs. Delaney. In her deposition, she turned to me. Mrs. Delaney, what did your husband whisper to you at the restaurant? I looked at the judge. I kept my voice calm, level despite the hurricane inside me. He said, "You are nothing." The words hung in the silent courtroom. They were so much louder here than they had been in the noisy restaurant. I looked at David. The smile was gone. He was staring at me, his face a mask of disbelief, and then slowly dawning fury. He hadn't believed I would actually say it. He hadn't believed I had the courage. When he took the stand, his composure was shattered. His lawyer asked him about the incident. It was a private moment, he spluttered. It was a joke about a household chore. She's twisting it. The judge, a woman with sharp, intelligent eyes, watched him carefully. She asked a simple question. Mr. Delaney, can you explain to the court the humorous context of telling your wife she is nothing? He stared at her, his mouth open, but no sound came out. He looked from the judge to his lawyer, back to me. There was no explanation. There never could be in that moment. Under the weight of the law and the truth, his facade crumbled completely. The judge saw it. Everyone saw it. She saw the bully who was enraged to find himself cornered, the man who thought his words could diminish a person forever, now rendered speechless by the consequences of those very words. The ruling was swift. Full custody for me with supervised visitation for him. The division of assets was favorable, but the victory wasn't in the legal terms, it was in the moment. The gavel came down and the words, "You are nothing," were officially forever a part of the court record. They were no longer a secret shame I carried. They were his words, his actions, documented and condemned by the one system he couldn't manipulate. He tried to make me nothing, but a nothing thing doesn't stand up in a courtroom and speak its truth. A nothing thing doesn't gather evidence and build a future. A nothing thing doesn't walk out of a courthouse with a legal decree that affirms its right to safety, its right to respect, its right to exist. That whisper was the seed of his own downfall. He gave me the weapon I needed to defeat him. I am not nothing. I am the woman who used his own cruelty to reclaim my life. And my story is now a matter of public record. The phone was just sitting there propped up against a vase of flowers. My friend Sarah was filming a little tour of the house for her Instagram story. You know the kind. Just panning around the room, showing off the decorations for our anniversary party. I remember seeing the little red recording light, but it didn't really register. It was just part of the background. Like the music or the chatter, I was focused on him, on my husband. Mark had been quiet all evening, a little tense. I thought maybe he was just tired from work. I was near the kitchen island refilling a bowl of snacks. When he came up behind me, he put his hand on my lower back the way he always does. And for a second I thought he was going to say something sweet, something for our anniversary. He leaned in, his lips almost touching my ear, and his voice was so low, so calm. It wasn't a shout, it was worse. It was a quiet, deliberate poison. He said, "You look ridiculous in that dress. It's like you're trying to be 20 again. Just go change before you embarrass us both." The air just went out of me. It was such a small sharp thing. My face felt hot. I couldn't even turn around. I just stood there frozen, holding a handful of crackers. He squeezed my side, a fake affectionate gesture. And then he was gone, melting back into the crowd of our friends, our family. I forced a smile, my heart hammering in my chest. I felt so small, so stupid. I remember thinking no one saw that, no one heard. This private little humiliation was mine to carry. I could just swallow it like I always did. It was Sarah who found it. She came up to me later, her face pale. She pulled me into the hallway away from everyone. Her hands were shaking. She showed me her phone. She'd been editing the video, cutting out the shaky parts, and she'd left the audio on. She played it back for me, and there it was, clear as day over the sound of the music and the party. You could hear his voice, that intimate, hateful whisper, "You look ridiculous in that dress." My own face in profile, the way my smile just dissolved into nothing. My first feeling was pure panic. A cold dread washed over me. I begged her to delete it. "Please, Sarah, just get rid of it. No one can ever see this. This was my life, my marriage. This was the secret I kept, the little cracks I was always papering over." The idea of it being out there for anyone to see was terrifying. What would people think of me, of him, of us? But Sarah just looked at me, and her eyes weren't pitying, they were angry for me. She said, "Hez, the one who should be embarrassed, not you." I didn't sleep that night. I lay in bed next to him, listening to him breathe, and I replayed that moment over and over. The whisper, the video, the choice. If I buried this, it would just be another thing I had to carry, another secret. But if I let it out, it would be a bomb. I thought about control. If I didn't release it, what if Sarah's phone got lost? What if she accidentally posted it? What if someone else had been recording? The narrative would be out of my hands. It would be gossip. But if I did it, if I was the one to hit post, then I was steering the ship. However chaotic it got, it would start with my decision, my truth. The fear was immense, a physical weight on my chest, but underneath it was something else, a tiny fear spark. The spark said, "I'm done hiding." So I did it. The next morning I sat at the kitchen table, my hands ice cold. I took the clip from Sarah. I didn't edit it. I didn't add dramatic music or a long story. I just wrote a simple caption. It said, "My 10th anniversary party." This is what my husband whispered to me when he thought no one was listening. I tagged the video with a few things: marriage, truth for Balabas. My finger hovered over the button. I took a deep breath, and I posted it. For the first hour, nothing happened. A few likes from my close friends who already knew. I felt a weird sense of anticlimax. Maybe it would just fade away. But then my phone started to vibrate, not a ring, just a constant buzzing hum. Likes turned into shares. Shares turned into hundreds, then thousands. The notifications were coming so fast my screen was just a blur. I had to turn the sound off. It was overwhelming, a tidal wave of digital noise. I started reading the comments. They were pouring in by the minute. There was so much support, so much anger on my behalf. Thousands of messages from women and men saying, "I've been there, this happened to me, you are not alone." They were sharing their own stories in the comments, creating this incredible tapestry of shared experience. My DMs were flooded with kindness, with resources, with offers of help. People were dissecting his tone, the casual cruelty of it. They saw what I saw, they heard what I heard, and then I saw the comments on his profiles, his public Facebook page, his LinkedIn. People were flooding them. They were posting the video link. They were calling him out. "Is this how you treat your wife? What kind of man says this?" I watched as he tried to fight it. He started deleting comments, but they were coming. In faster than he could remove them. Then he changed his privacy settings to private. Then a few hours later his profiles just disappeared altogether. He had deactivated everything. He was trying to erase himself from the internet, but the video was already everywhere. It was on Twitter, on TikTok, on YouTube. He was a meme, a cautionary tale. His digital life was just gone. I felt powerful. For the first time in a long, long time, I felt a sense of control. This thing he did in the shadows was now in the brightest light possible, so I decided to lean in. I didn't just let the story be about that one moment. I started to reclaim the narrative. I made a follow-up video. I sat on my couch, looked directly into the camera, and I talked. I didn't cry. I was calm. I said, "Thank you for all your support. This isn't just about a comment about a dress. This is about a pattern of behavior. It's about the slow erosion of your self-esteem." I talked about the other comments, the little digs about my cooking, my career, my friends. I shared that I was seeing a lawyer. I was taking steps to protect myself. I started a new account, a space dedicated to talking about emotional abuse. I shared resource shitlines, articles, book recommendations. I used the platform that this awful moment had given me. The conversation shifted. It wasn't just poor her, what a horrible husband. It became, look at her strength, look at how she's turning this around. People weren't pitying me, they were respecting me. They saw the strategy, they saw the courage. It took. The fallout in his real life was immediate. Mutual friends started texting me, not him. They were horrified. They said they never knew. I heard through the grapevine that people at his company had seen the video. There were meetings. He was asked to take a leave of absence while they did some kind of internal review. His professional reputation, the one he cared so much about, was in tatters. The whispers he loved to use against me were now echoing back at him, but they weren't whispers anymore. They were a roar. In the weeks that followed, I built something new. This community of support became my foundation. I started working with a domestic violence advocacy group and even thinking about going back to school for counseling. The woman in that video, the one who flinched at a whisper, she feels like a different person. She was a version of me I had to leave behind. I think about the permanence of it all sometimes. That video is out there forever. His whisper is etched into the digital record, a permanent testament to his character. But so is my response. My face, my voice, my story of reclaiming my life. He tried to make me feel small and insignificant. He tried to erase my confidence. But by using the very tool he thought would hide his sin, I amplified my truth. He wanted to silence me with a whisper, but all he did was give my voice a microphone. And now everyone can hear me. The holiday lights were twinkling on the tree in the corner, reflecting off the polished silver and the crystal glasses. The air was thick with the smell of roast turkey and pine needles. A fire crackled in the hearth, and the room was full of my family, aunts, uncles, cousins, my mom, my brother. It was supposed to be a picture of perfect Christmas cheer, but I felt like I was watching it all from the other side of a frozen window pane. I spent the whole morning, the whole week, really praying for this, praying that for just one day he would let the mask stay on, that we could pretend, just for a few hours, that we were a normal family, that I was a normal person. I could feel the tension in my own shoulders, a tight coil of anxiety that had been winding itself up for months. Every time I tried to join a conversation, he was there. If my uncle asked me about my job, my husband would jump in before I could even open my mouth. OSHA's managing head say with a light chuckle, patting my hand. It's a lot for her, but she's a trooper. And the family would just nod, smile weakly, and move on. They were so used to it I could see it in their eyes, a flicker of something pity maybe or discomfort, but it was always followed by a quick look away. He had built these walls around me so carefully, brick by brick, with little comments and subtle put-downs, until I was isolated right in the middle of a crowded room. I felt like a ghost at my own table. The dinner started, plates were passed. Wine was poured, laughter echoed, but it never quite reached me. I was performing, smiling on cue, nodding at stories. My husband sat beside me, his presence like a constant heavy weight. I could feel his judgment radiating from him, a silent critique of every move I made, every word I almost said. I kept my head down, focusing on the food on my plate, trying to make myself small and invisible. Just get through the meal, I kept thinking, just get through this one day. Then my brother Mark turned to me. So Sarah, he said, his voice warm and genuine, you never did tell us the full story about that big project. You finished the one you were so stressed about last month. How did the presentation go? My heart leapt into my throat. It was a simple question, a kind question. For a split second I felt a surge of pride. I'd worked so hard on that project, staying late, pushing through the self-doubt he always sowed in me. I glanced at my husband. His smile was frozen, his eyes narrowed just slightly, a warning. But the warmth in my brother's face, the expectant look from my mom, it gave me a sliver of courage. I took a small breath. It went really well, actually, I said, my voice quieter than I wanted it to be. The clients were thrilled. My boss said it was the best proposal had seen all year. They're even talking about a promotion. The words hung in the air for a beautiful, terrifying moment. My mother's face broke into a real beaming smile. Mark was about to say something to congratulate me, and then my husband moved. He didn't shout. He never shouts in public. That's not his style. He leaned in close to me, so close I could feel his breath on my ear. His hand came down on my wrist, under the table, his grip tight enough to bruise. His voice was a low, venomous whisper, a sound meant for me and me alone, a sound I had heard in the dark so many times before. You see, he hissed, you see how you crave their approval. It's pathetic. You think this little accomplishment makes you something. You're nothing without me. You'd be lost without me. The world shrank to that pinpoint of sound, the clatter of cutlery, the laughter, the Christmas music from the steroid, all just vanished, swallowed by the roaring in my ears. You're nothing. The words were like ice water dumped down my spine. I felt the hot prick of tears behind my eyes, but I couldn't let them fall. I just stared at my plate, my vision blurring, the food turning into a meaningless smear of color. I waited for the usual script to play out, for the awkward silence, for someone to clear their throat and changed the subject, for them all to pretend once again that they hadn't just seen the monster under the bed. But the silence didn't break, it deepened. It became a solid thing, heavy and profound. I dared to look up. My mother was staring at my husband, her face pale, her napkin crumpled in her fist. My brother Mark was no longer smiling. He was staring, his jaw clenched so tight I could see the muscle twitching. The whole table had gone quiet. Everyone had seen him lean in. Everyone had seen the look on my face after the charade was over. Then a sharp crack. My mother slapped her hand flat on the table, making the glasses jump. What did you just say to her? Her voice wasn't loud, but it was sharp as a razor, cutting through the dead air. My husband blinked, recoiling as if she'd struck him. The smug, controlled mask slipped for a second, revealing pure shock. It was nothing, Margaret. A private joke, didn't Sound like a joke, Mark said, his voice low and dangerous. He pushed his chair back and stood up as a big man, my brother, and in that moment he seemed to fill the entire room. It looked like you were hurting her wrist, and it sounded like you were telling my sister she is nothing. Is that your idea of a joke? The dam broke, my aunt chimed in, her voice trembling but firm. We've watched this for years, John. The way you talk down to her, the way you never let her finish a sentence, my cousin added. We always thought we didn't know what to do. We thought if we said something it would just make it worse for you. When you got home, my mother stood up, now her eyes blazing with a fury I had never seen directed at anyone but him. We are not letting you do this to her anymore, not in my house, not ever again. We've been quiet for too long, waiting for her to see it, waiting for a sign. Well, this is the sign. You just showed us exactly who you are in front of all of us. I sat there frozen, watching this unfold. It was like watching a play I'd never seen before, but I was the central character, the narrative I had lived with for so long that I was alone, that no one saw, that no one cared, shattered into a million pieces. They had seen, they had always seen. They weren't blind, they were paralyzed. They were waiting for a moment this clear, this undeniable, to break the spell he had over all of us. The isolation I felt wasn't just his creation. It was a prison we were all trapped in, and they had just found the key. My husband was sputtering, his face flushed with anger and humiliation. His control was gone. His carefully constructed world where he was the smartest man in the room, and I was his helpless dependent, had just exploded in his face. You can't. This is my wife. This is between us. No, my brother said, stepping closer. It's not anymore. You need to leave right now. And they all stood with him, my mother, my brother, my aunt, my cousin, a united front, a wall of love and fury between him and me. He looked from one stony face to another, and for the first time he looked small. He looked like the coward he was. Without another word he threw his napkin on the table, turned, and walked out of the room. The front door slammed shut, and the house seemed to let out a breath it had been holding for a decade. The second the door closed, the energy in the room shifted. The tension didn't vanish, but it transformed. It melted into something else. My mother was at my side in an instant, her arms around me, pulling me up from the chair. My brother was there, his big hand on my shoulder. I am so sorry, Sarah, he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. I am so sorry we waited so long. I started to cry, then deep body-racking sobs that I had been holding back for years. But they weren't tears of sadness or shame, they were tears of release, a weight being lifted so suddenly that I felt like I might float away. They held me tight, my whole family, forming a circle around me, a circle of protection I never knew I had. That was just the beginning. The real work started the next day. We started family therapy. We had long, difficult, painful conversations around my mother's kitchen table with coffee and tissues always within reach. We talked about all the times they saw something and didn't speak up. I talked about the things that happened behind closed doors. We dismantled his lies brick by painful brick, the narrative he had built that I was unstable, incompetent, incapable, evaporated in the light of our shared truth. It taught me a brutal but beautiful lesson. Sometimes the moment of worst humiliation, the moment you think is your final undoing, can be the very thing that saves you. It can be the spark that ignites a revolution of love. That whisper, "You're nothing," which was meant to destroy me, ended up being the catalyst that showed me how much I was truly worth. The last image I have isn't of his angry face or the slammed door. It's from later that night after He was gone. We were all sitting in the living room, the Christmas lights still twinkling, the fire reduced to embers. I was curled up on the sofa, wrapped in a blanket, my head in my mother's lap. My brother was on the floor, leaning against my legs. No one was saying much. We were just there, together, and in that quiet, healing space, the echo of those terrible words was finally completely replaced. It was replaced by a feeling, a silent, unwavering chorus that filled the room. And my heart, we love you, we see you, and you are everything to us. You hear a phrase like that, you're nothing without me, and it can sound so dramatic, almost like a line from a movie. But when you're on the receiving end, it doesn't feel dramatic. It feels like a quiet, cold truth delivered in a whisper. It's a specific, calculated form of emotional and psychological abuse, and it's crucial to understand that this kind of abuse isn't primarily about anger. It's about control. The goal is to dominate another person's sense of reality, to make them doubt their own worth, their own memories, their own mind. The purpose of this degradation is systematic erosion. It's not a one-time insult hurled in a moment of frustration. It's a slow, steady chipping away at your self-esteem. Each comment, each whispered put down is like a drop of water on a stone, designed to wear you down. Over time, the ultimate objective for the abuser is to create dependency. If they can convince you that you are fundamentally flawed, incompetent, or nothing, then you will be less likely to leave. You start to believe that you truly couldn't survive on your own, that they are in fact your rescuer from your own inadequacy. Now let's talk about the method itself, the whisper. Hi, a whisper. Why not shout it? The whisper is a weapon of intimacy turned perverse. It's said close to your ear, in a crowd, at a family dinner, in bed. It's a comment meant for you and you alone. This achieves several things. First, it creates a feeling of being trapped. You're in public, surrounded by people who are laughing and talking, yet you are completely isolated in this bubble of abuse. You can't react. You can't cry out, because to everyone else nothing has happened. It's the perfect crime in a sense, because there are no witnesses, only you and the voice in your ear. Second, the whisper provides the abuser with plausible deniability. If you were to confront them later, they could easily say, I never said that. You're imagining things. Why would I whisper something so terrible? It doesn't make sense. This is a classic gaslighting technique. It makes you question your own perception of events. Did I really hear that? Maybe I misinterpreted it. This layers confusion on top of the humiliation. Then there is the specific content. Without me. This is the core of the narcissistic narrative. It instills a false dichotomy of rescuer versus victim. The abuser positions themselves as the indispensable savior, the only thing standing between you and total ruin. They distort reality to support this story. They might undermine your accomplishments, take credit for your successes, or magnify your mistakes. They create a world where their presence is the only thing that gives your life value. This is a profound psychological manipulation because it attacks your very identity. It's not just saying you're bad at something. It's saying that your entire existence is invalid without their permission. When you are the target of this kind of attack, the psychological impact is immediate and deep. There's the acute trauma of the public humiliation. You're experiencing this private, devastating abuse while simultaneously having to maintain a public facade. You have to keep smiling, keep nodding while inside your world is collapsing. This combination is uniquely damaging. It forces you to compartmentalize your pain in real time, which is an incredibly difficult psychological task. This often leads to a state of cognitive dissonance, This is the mental discomfort you feel when you hold to conflicting beliefs. On one hand, you have your own sense of self, the person you know yourself to be, person with strengths, with memories, with a history. On the other hand, you have this authoritative voice, someone who claims to know you intimately, defining you as nothing. The brain struggles to reconcile these two things. To reduce the discomfort, it often starts to side with the abuser. You begin to think, well, maybe they are right. They see me all the time. Maybe I am exaggerating my own capabilities. Maybe I really am nothing without them. This is how the abuser's narrative gets internalized. In the moment of the attack, you might experience what's known as the freeze response. You don't fight back, you don't run away. You just stand there frozen. This isn't a choice or a sign of weakness, it's a neurobiological response to a perceived threat. Your nervous system is overwhelmed. The prefrontal cortex, the part of your brain responsible for complex thought and reasoning, essentially goes offline. You're operating from the more primitive parts of your brain, the ones designed for survival, and sometimes the best survival tactic when you feel trapped is to freeze, to play dead in the hope that the threat will pass. So if you didn't shout back or walk away immediately, please understand that was your body's way of trying to protect you. It's a normal reaction to an abnormal situation. The long-term effects of enduring this pattern of abuse can be severe. Many victims develop symptoms of complex post-traumatic stress disorder, or CPTSD, unlike PTSD, which is often linked to a single event. CPTSD comes from prolonged repeated trauma where you feel you cannot escape. This can manifest as chronic anxiety, hypervigilance, where you're constantly scanning for danger, depression, and a deeply held sense of shame. The most damaging part is the internalization of the abuser's voice. That whisper, "You're nothing without me," becomes your own inner critic. Long after the relationship is over, you continue to abuse yourself with the same words, the same tone. You might find yourself hesitating to apply for a job or pulling back from a friendship because that internal voice is telling you that you're not good enough, that you'll fail without that person. But here is where a paradox emerges. The very thing that makes the public whisper so painful, presence of other people, can also become a source of healing. The public nature of the incident can be a therapeutic turning point. For years, the abuse has happened behind closed doors. It's been your secret, your shame. But when it happens in front of others, even if they didn't hear the words, the isolation is broken. The secret is out, even if only to you. In a no way, it shatters the illusion that this is a normal private relationship dynamic. This can open the door to validation. Perhaps you confide in a friend who was there. You say, "When he whispered to me, something broke." That friend might provide an objective reality check. They might say, "I saw your face change. I knew something was wrong." What you're describing makes sense. This external validation is a powerful antidote to gaslighting. It confirms that your perceptions are real, that your feelings are valid. It's evidence that contradicts the abuser's distorted narrative. This validation can catalyze a crucial shift from self-blame to righteous anger. For so long you've likely blamed yourself. "What did I do to provoke this? If only I were better, this wouldn't happen." But when you see the event through the potential eyes of a witness, you might start to think, no one deserves to be spoken to that way. This is not about my failings, this is about his behavior. That anger is not destructive, it's protective. It's a signal from your psyche that a boundary has been violently crossed. It's the energy you need to begin defending yourself. This single event As awful as it is, can often be the catalyst that pushes someone to finally seek help, to find a therapist, to join a support group, to start telling the truth about what's been happening. The road to recovery is about rebuilding the self that was systematically dismantled. The first and most important practical step is to find a therapist who specializes in trauma and relational abuse. A general therapist may not have the specific training to understand the nuances of coercive control and CPTSD. This therapist will provide a safe, consistent, and validating environment where you can process the trauma and begin to challenge the internalized beliefs. Alongside therapy, the practice of self-compassion is vital. This means actively talking to yourself with kindness, as you would a dear friend who had been through a terrible ordeal. When that critical inner voice says you're nothing, you learn to respond with, "I hear that thought, and it's a painful one left over from a painful time, but it is not the truth. I am a person who is hurting, and I am taking steps to heal." This is not about positive affirmations that feel false. It's about offering yourself basic human compassion. Rebuilding a support network is another key step. Abuse thrives in isolation. You need to slowly and safely reconnect with people who reflect your true worth back to you. This might mean joining a support group for survivors of emotional abuse. There is immense power in sitting in a room with people who just get it without you having to explain everything. Reclaiming your personal power involves actively silencing that internalized critical voice. One strategy is to give the voice a name, maybe the abuser's name, or something silly like that critic. When it starts its litany, you can say, "Oh, that's just the critic talking. That's its old tape. I don't have to listen to it anymore." This creates a psychological distance between you and the abusive thought, allowing you to see it as an external artifact of past trauma, not a core truth about you. It's also important to educate yourself on the signs of coercive control, understanding the tactics, the isolation, the gaslighting, the degradation, the financial control allows you to see the abuse as a pattern, a playbook, rather than as a series of random conflicts. This knowledge is empowering. It helps you recognize these red flags not only in your past relationship but in any future ones, protecting you and potentially others. The final message, the one I want you to take away, if you have heard these words, is this: you are not nothing. You are a person who was targeted by a calculated strategy designed to break you down. The fact that you hurt so much is not proof of your weakness, but proof of your humanity. Your spirit resisted the pain is a testament to the fact that they did not fully succeed. You are a survivor. Healing is not about erasing what happened, but about integrating it into your story as an event you endured, an event that taught you something about the depth of your own strength. The journey back to yourself is long, but it is possible. The goal is to slowly, gently reclaim the truth that you are something, you are someone entirely on your own. The party was in full swing at their beautiful house, you know, the kind where everything looks perfect, the art on the walls, the expensive cheese platter, the way he had his arm draped around her shoulder a little too tight. It was a pose, a photograph, an ID scene that photographed too many times before. I've been Sarah's best friend since college. I knew her when she was the loudest one in the room, the first to dance on a table, the one with an opinion on everything. Over the last 5 years, I've watched that light dim piece by piece. It's never one big thing you can point to, it's the little comments he'd make. Are you sure you should wear that? That's not how you pronounce that word, sweetheart. head say it with a laugh like it was a joke, but his eyes never joined in her laughter and response became quieter, more hesitant. I'd tried to bring it up once or twice. Is everything okay with Mark? I'd asked, and should always give me the same practice smile. Oh, he's just stressed with work, you know how he is. And I'd let it go because what if I was wrong? What if I was just being an overprotective friend and I ended up pushing her away? The fear of making things worse, of isolating her further, kept me quiet. It's a heavy guilt to carry. Watching someone you love fade and feeling like your hands are tied. That night I was talking to a couple by the fireplace, but my eyes kept finding Sarah. She was circulating with a tray of drinks, playing the perfect hostess. Mark was holding court near the bookshelf, holding a glass of whiskey, holding everyone's attention, but his eyes were tracking her every move she made. If she lingered too long talking to someone, his jaw would tighten just a fraction. I saw it. I think a few other people saw it too, but everyone just looked away. It's easier to pretend you didn't see. I decided to go over to her, to just offer a hand with the tray, to create a moment of normalcy between us. As I walked across the room, the path took me right behind where Mark was standing. He was leaning in, talking to one of his colleagues. Sarah was just a few feet away, picking up an empty glass from a side table. That's when I heard it. It wasn't loud. It was a low, venomous whisper meant only for her, but I was close enough. The space between the songs on the playlist happened at that exact second, a moment of dead air. And his words sliced right through it. You're nothing without me. It was so clear, so deliberate. The tone was flat, cold, absolute. It wasn't a burst of anger. It was a statement of fact. In his mind, my whole body went cold. It was like a physical blow to my chest. I actually stopped breathing for a second. My eyes snapped to Sarah's face. I saw her whole body flinch like she'd been slapped. The color drained from her cheeks. She didn't look at him. She just stared at the empty glass in her hand, and her shoulders slumped. It was a posture of pure defeat, a humiliation so deep it was almost private, and in that moment any doubt I'd ever had vanished. This wasn't a one-time thing, this was the truth of her life. My heart was hammering. I looked around quickly. The colleague Mark was talking to had heard it. I saw the shock on his face, the way his eyes widened before he dropped his gaze to his shoes. Uncomfortable. Another woman nearby met my eyes for a split second, and there was a shared horrified understanding there. But then she turned away, pretending to be fascinated by painting. The social contract of the party demanded that we all ignore it, that we let the music swallow the ugliness. And I had a choice right there in that crowded room. One could do what everyone else was doing. I could pretend I didn't hear it. I could let the moment pass, let him get away with it, let her suffer in silence. Or I could break the spell. It felt like an eternity. But it was only a couple of seconds. My feet started moving before my brain had fully caught up. I walked straight to Sarah. I didn't look at Mark. I put my hand gently on her arm. She jumped at the touch. Her skin was ice cold. Hey, I said, my voice surprisingly steady, can you help me in the kitchen for a sec? I think we need more ice. It was a flimsy excuse, but it was a lifeline. She looked at me, and the pain in her eyes was so raw it was almost hard to hold her gaze. But there was also a flicker of relief. She nodded mutely. I took the empty glass from her hand and set it down. I guided her, my arm round her waist, steering her away from the crowd towards the kitchen. As soon as we were through the swinging door, away from the noise and the eyes she started to tremble. The kitchen was bright, sterile. The contrast with the warm, noisy party was jarring. "Sarah," I said, turning her to face me. I kept my voice low and firm. I heard what he said. I heard him. A sob escaped her, a short, choked sound. She tried to turn away, but I held her shoulders. "Look at me. It is not true. Do you hear me? It is a lie. You are everything. You are strong, and you are smart, and you are kind. You are not nothing." Tears started streaming down her face. "Silently, Hes right," she whispered, her voice breaking. "Look at me. I can't even know," I said more forcefully. "This is not your fault. This is on him. You have done nothing wrong." I pulled her into a hug, and she clung to me, her whole body shaking. I could feel the years of pent-up fear and sadness in that embrace. "I'm getting you out of here," I said into her hair. "Right now we're leaving." She pulled back, panic in her eyes. "I can't. The party, everyone will." "I don't care about the party," I said, "and I don't care what anyone thinks. Your safety is the only thing that matters. Go upstairs and get your purse and a jacket. Tell no one. I'll meet you at the front door in 2 minutes." She hesitated. The old programming of obedience fighting with this new terrifying possibility of escape. But then she nodded. She wiped her eyes with the back of her hand, took a deep, shaky breath, and slipped out the other kitchen door that led to the hallway. I walked back into the living room. The party seemed surreal now. The laughter was hollow. I found my own coat and purse. Mark saw me and gave me a broad fake smile. "Leaving so soon? I'm not feeling well," I said, my voice flat. I didn't smile back. I held his gaze for a second longer, then was comfortable, and I saw a flicker of uncertainty in his eyes. He knew that I knew. I met Sarah at the door. We didn't speak. We just walked out into the cool night air. The silence was a relief. I drove her to my apartment. She was silent the whole way, just staring out the window. When we got inside, I made her a cup of tea. We sat on my couch, and she cried. She cried for a long time, and then she started to talk. She talked for hours. She told me things she'd never told anyone. The constant criticism, the way he controlled the money, the way he isolated her from her family. The times had blocked the doorway during an argument. It all came pouring out. I just listened. I didn't offer advice. I didn't tell her what to do. I just let her talk. And I believed every single word. She stayed with me that night and for many nights after. The next morning we started making calls, first to a domestic violence hotline, then to a lawyer. I went with her to the police station to make a report. I was there when she told her parents. It was messy, and it was scary, and there were times she wanted to go back because the familiar hell is sometimes less terrifying than the unknown. But I was her pillar. I checked in with her every day. I reminded her of her strength when she forgot it. I helped her pack her things from the house. When Mark was at work, I celebrated the small victories with her, like when she opened her own bank account. The most important thing I did was I never judged her. I never said, "Why did you stay?" I just said, "I'm here now, and with you." Being an ally isn't about swooping in and fixing everything. It's about standing beside someone consistently, patiently, while they find the power to fix it themselves. It's been a year now. Sarah has her own apartment. She's back in school, finishing the degree she put on hold. For him, the light in her eyes is back. It's brighter than ever. The other day we were having coffee, and she laughed, a real deep and forced laugh. She looked at me and said, "You saved my life." But that's not it. I didn't save her. I just refused to let her drown alone. I handed her a lifeline. She's the one who had the incredible courage to grab it and swim. The honor of being that person, the one she trusted in Her darkest moment is something I will never take for granted. Seeing her rediscover herself piece by piece has been the greatest reward. It's a reminder that a single voice saying, "I see you, I hear you, and I believe you," can be the thing that breaks the silence. The room was buzzing. It was the launch party for the new marketing campaign, my campaign, the one I'd spent 6 months developing, the one everyone at the agency had said was too ambitious, but the client loved it. The champagne was flowing, and the air was thick with congratulations. I could feel the energy of the room, this electric hum of success. And for the first time in a long time, I felt like I was standing in my own light. My husband David was beside me, had come along as he always did for these things. He was smiling, shaking hands, playing the part of the supportive spouse, but his grip on my elbow was a little too tight. I saw the way his eyes scanned the room, calculating the net worth of every person he talked to. He was in his element. But it was a different element from mine. Mine was creation. His was acquisition. The managing partner, Charles, came over, clapping me on the shoulder. "A stellar job, truly stellar," he boomed. "I knew you had it in you. This is the kind of work that puts an agency on the map. We're lucky to have you." He was looking directly at me, his praise genuine and warm. I felt a flush of pride. This was it. This was the recognition I'd been working for. David's smile tightened. He leaned in close, his lips almost touching my ear. The scent of his expensive cologne, usually so familiar, suddenly felt suffocating. The noise of the party seemed to fade for a moment, and his voice was low, a venomous whisper, "Meant only for me. Don't let it go to your head. You know this is just a fluke. You're nothing without me and my connections." Remember that the words didn't just hit me, they seeped in. They were like a poison, instantly turning the champagne in my stomach to ice. The laughter around me became a distant, mocking sound. The bright lights of the party seemed to spotlight only my shame. I felt my smile freeze on my face, a brittle mask. I nodded at something Charles said, but I didn't hear the words. All I could hear was that sentence playing on a loop in my mind, "You're nothing." The car ride home was silent. I stared out the window at the blur of city lights, each one a tiny distant star. I felt completely hollowed out. For years I'd let his narrative define me, the supportive wife, the one with the nice little hobby of a career, had paid for my MBA, had introduced me to people, and he never let me forget it. Every success was subtly framed as a reflection of his support. But this was different. This was my work, my victory, and he had to stomp on it to claim it as his own creation. The hollowness began to fill, not with sadness, but with a cold, sharp, and utterly clear anger. I didn't sleep that night. I sat in the dark in my home office, looking at the awards on my shelf, the degrees on the wall. They felt like artifacts from someone else's life. "You're nothing." The words were no longer condemnation. They were a challenge, a gauntlet thrown down. If I was nothing without him, then who was I? I had to find out. By sunrise, the devastation had burned away, leaving behind a white-hot core of determination. This wasn't about proving him wrong to him. This was about proving him wrong to myself. That very morning I called in sick to the agency. Then I went to my computer and opened a blank document. The title was Simple Business Plan. I reached out to a few people from the party, people who had seen the exchange, even if they hadn't heard the words. Sarah, a woman who ran her own PR firm, met me for coffee. I saw the way he looked at you when you were getting praised. She said quietly, "You're 10 times the strategist he is. You don't need his shadow." Her belief was a kind of fuel. I found other mentors, women who had built their own empires out of less they became my board of directors. The next year was a blur of motion. I left the agency. David thought I was insane. You're throwing away a perfectly good career, Head said, shaking his head. But it wasn't my career, it was a cage. I started my own consulting firm focusing on boutique brands that needed a sharp modern strategy. The first few months were terrifying. There were days with no clients, weeks where the bank account dwindled. The fear was a constant companion, but I had a mantra whenever I felt like giving up, whenever the doubt crept in. I would close my eyes, and I would be back in that party. I would feel his hand on my elbow, smell his cologne, and hear that whisper, "You're nothing." And the fear would transform. It would become fuel. It pushed me to work later, to network harder, to refine my pitches until they were perfect. That moment became my engine. I wasn't just building a business, I was building a fortress around the person I knew I could be. I got my first client, a small, sustainable fashion brand that couldn't pay much, but believed in my vision. I poured everything into that project. When it succeeded, leading to a feature in a major magazine, it brought 2 more clients, then 5. I hired my first employee, a brilliant young designer who believed in my mission. We got our first office, a small but sunlit space that felt entirely our own. David and I drifted apart in every way. Had come home from his high-stakes deals, and I'd be on a call with a client in another time zone. My confidence was growing, and it seemed to irritate him. The more successful I became, the quieter he grew. The house, which had once felt like a shared space, now felt like a hotel where 2 strangers were staying. The divorce, when it finally happened, was almost an afterthought. My lawyer was paid with my company's profits. I didn't fight him on the settlement. I didn't need to. I had everything I needed. My independence was my greatest asset. The call came on a Tuesday morning. It was a journalist from Forbes. They were doing a feature on female entrepreneurs who had scaled their businesses to 7 figures in under 3 years. They wanted to include me. They wanted to do a photo shoot at my headquarters and have me speak at their annual summit. The summit was a massive event, thousands of attendees, all the big names in business. I said yes. Without even thinking. The day of the summit, I stood backstage looking at the teleprompter. I had a speech prepared all about market trends and growth strategies. It was fine, it was safe. But as I heard my name introduced, as I walked out into the blinding lights and the applause from a sea of faces, I knew I couldn't give that speech. I walked to the podium and looked out, and there near the back I saw him, David. He was trying to be inconspicuous, but I saw him. He had come to see what I had become. I set my notes down on the podium. I took a deep breath. The room went quiet. "Thank you," I began. "The speech I prepared today is about business metrics, but I think the most important metric, the one we rarely talk about, is the distance between the person you were told you are and the person you know you can be." I paused, my eyes finding his in the crowd. He looked away, but it was too late. The connection was made 3 years ago, at what should have been a moment of professional triumph. Someone I loved told me I was nothing. He said I was nothing without him, and in that moment he was right, because I had given him the power to define my worth. The room was utterly silent. You could have heard a pin drop. I used those words as fuel. I built a company not just to make money, but to build a new foundation for myself. Every late night, every rejected pitch, every moment of doubt was met with the memory of that single sentence. It was the most painful gift I have ever received. because it forced me to look at myself with absolute honesty. I was nothing, I was just someone who had forgotten her own strength. I talked about the journey not with bitterness, but with a profound sense of gratitude for the awakening. I spoke about the importance of building your own table instead of waiting for a seat at someone else's. I talked about financial independence not as a number in a bank account, but as the freedom to have your own voice. So my message to you today isn't about business plans. I said, my voice firm and clear. It's about the moment someone tries to tell you who you are the next time someone tells you you're nothing. I let the words hang in the air, a direct echo of the past. I looked out at the audience, at the hundreds of faces, mostly women watching me. I saw the recognition in their eyes. They knew this story. They had lived some version of it themselves. I smiled, a real, genuine smile. Show them just how wrong they are. The applause was thunderous. It wasn't just for the success of the business. It was for the victory of the self. As I walked off the stage, I didn't look back at him. I didn't need to. The space he had occupied in my life, the space that had once felt so silent and empty, was now filled with a future I had built entirely on my own. The air in the charity gala was thick with perfume and the low, polite murmur of wealthy people trying to sound important. Crystal glasses clinked, a string quartet played something forgettable in the corner, and all round me the performance of a perfect life was in full swing. I stood near a tall window looking out at the city lights, but my focus was entirely inward. I'd been planning this night for months, every detail from the dress I wore to the way I held my champagne flute was a calculated part of strategy. This wasn't just another social obligation. It was my final test. I had already left this marriage emotionally. My bags were packed, figuratively and literally, sitting in a storage unit across town. The apartment was already empty of anything that truly mattered to me. I was a ghost at the feast, and tonight was my farewell appearance. I felt him before I saw him. A shift in the air, a familiar presence that once would have sent a jolt of anxiety through me. He moved through the crowd with a practiced charm, slapping backs and flashing that smile that never quite reached his eyes. He was performing too, but where his performance was for the approval of others, mine was for a single solitary purpose, my own freedom. I took a slow, deliberate sip of champagne, the bubbles sharp on my tongue. I knew him too well. The evening had been too smooth, too civil. He needed a crack in my composure. He needed to see me flinch to know he still had power. He was circling, waiting for the moment to strike, and I was waiting for him to try. He finally approached, sliding an arm around my waist with a possessiveness that felt like a brand. His voice was a low purr meant only for my ears, a stark contrast to the public bonhomie he had just been displaying. Enjoying the show, darling? You look a bit pale. Not feeling overwhelmed, are you? This is a bit more than your usual scene. It was the opening gambit, designed to make me feel small, out of place. I simply turned my head and met his gaze. I didn't smile, I didn't frown. My face was a placid lake. I saw a flicker of confusion in his eyes. This wasn't the reaction he wanted. He leaned in closer, his lips nearly brushing my ear. The scent of his cologne, something expensive and sharp, was suddenly suffocating. This was at the moment I knew was coming. His whisper was a venomous little dart meant to pierce my armor. You see, all these people, they're here for me, for my name, my influence. You're just the accessory. Without me, you're nothing. You have nothing. You are nothing. The words were the same ones had used before in private when he wanted to break me down. But they landed differently tonight. They didn't land at all. I didn't freeze. I didn't gasp. I didn't feel the cold shock I used to. Instead, a profound stillness settled over me. It was a conscious, active choice. I slowly turned my head, my movement fluid and calm until I was looking directly into his eyes. I held his gaze. I could see the expectation there, the hunger for a reaction, for tears, for anger. For a whispered plea. I gave him nothing. Then I allowed a very small, very faint smile to touch my lips. It wasn't a smile of happiness or amusement. It was a smile of pity. I felt the shift. Instantly his grip on my waist tightened for a second, then loosened. The confidence in his eyes wavered, replaced by a flicker of something I'd never seen before, uncertainty. He was the one who flinched. My silence was a wall he couldn't scale. My calm was a weapon he didn't know how to fight. Inside, my mind was not passive. It was a fortress, a command center. I heard his words, but I didn't let them in. They were just sounds, empty syllables from a man who had lost all power over me. He was trying to sell me a lie, and I was no longer buying. I knew exactly who I was. I was the woman who had secretly secured a new apartment. I was the woman who had quietly moved her most precious possessions, her grandmother's china, her books, her daughter's childhood drawings, to a safe place. I was the woman who had met with a lawyer and had the divorce papers drawn up, paid for with money ID slowly siphoned into a private account. Nothing. I was everything he feared. A mind of my own, a plan of my own, a life of my own, waiting just beyond his reach. As I held his gaze, my peripheral vision took in the room. I saw Margaret from the board, her eyes briefly meeting mine with a look of quiet understanding. I saw David, his brow furrowed with concern. I mentally catalogued their reactions. These were not just witnesses, they were data points. Their silent support was a resource. My lack of reaction was a strategic masterstroke. If I had cried, if I had argued, he would have twisted it. He would have played the concerned husband, telling everyone I was hysterical, unstable. He would have used my emotion as a weapon against me. By giving him nothing, I denied him that narrative. I denied him the drama he craved. In that moment, I was not a victim. I was a strategist. And the battle was unfolding exactly as I had planned. After a measured pause, a silence that stretched out and became heavier than any insult, I gently removed his arm from my waist. My movements were graceful, deliberate. There was no anger in them, only a final, absolute dismissal. "If you'll excuse me," I said, my voice calm and clear, not a whisper. It was a statement heard by anyone standing close enough. I didn't look back at him. I turned and walked through the crowd. I felt every eye on me. But I didn't hurry. I walked with my head high, my posture straight. Each step was a declaration. I collected my coat from the attendant, thanked him, and stepped out into the cool night air. The door closed behind me, shutting out the noise and the false light. I took a deep, clean breath. It was over. The following days were a study in precision. There was no shouting, no dramatic confrontation. There was only action. While he was at the office, the movers I'd hired weeks ago arrived at the apartment. They loaded the few remaining pieces of furniture I wanted, my reading chair, my desk, and they were gone within 2 hours. I was gone. I left no note. The silence I had cultivated at the gala extended into my departure. It was a profound, resonant silence that spoke volumes. The divorce papers were delivered to his office by a process server, clean, clinical, legal. The final confrontation, when it came, was in a lawyer's conference room. He tried to rage. He tried to guilt me. He demanded to know why, how I could do This I simply slid a folder across the table. It contained copies of bank statements, a timeline, the evidence of my long, quiet preparation. I didn't need to say a word. My actions had already said everything. The power wasn't in a loud argument, it wasn't in trying to convince him he was wrong. The power was in my refusal to play his game any longer. My silence that night wasn't weakness, it wasn't passivity, it was the deepest strength I have ever known. It was the calm at the center of the storm. I had decided to walk away from that. Silence was the space where I reclaimed myself. It was the sound of my freedom beginning. He whispered, "You're nothing," thinking he was stating a fact, but my silence was my answer. It was the quiet, unshakable truth that I was everything, and I was finally completely free.